It was in 1955. My mother and my two sisters and I flew in from Ecuador. My father had come a year earlier. My aunt and uncle helped him get a job, and he saved money, and he sent for us. My mother, she was born in a little town called Latacunga. She was like 4 when her mother died in childbirth. My father was the kind of guy who was very set in his ways. He was a traditional Latin American male, very macho. He was very stuck in the old traditional things. My older sister was born in 49, I was born in 50. My other sister was born in 52. I remember living in Quito. My mother would fill a tub outside full of water, and we would take a bath in that tub. We lived in Quito for 5-6 years. Then they decided to move up here. Holyoke was pretty different in those days. Where we lived in the Flats, which is one of the downtown neighborhoods, it was primarily Irish and some French Canadians. When the Irish first came, they were the first big immigrant group to come to Holyoke. And they settled here first. They called apartments flats, like they do in England and Ireland. So that's how it caught on. It's a working class neighborhood that the housing was situated very close to the factories. 4-story walk-ups with a brick facade and wooden porches. They built the factories well, but the housing was more transient. They didn't expect it to be around that long. Holyoke was this wave of immigrants that came. The Irish were the first, but then the French Canadians. There was a large Polish community, a good Jewish community, a good number of Greeks and Italians. And it all started off in the downtown neighborhoods. When we got here, it was after the Second World War, and things were kind of booming in Holyoke. Because of the GI Bill, the soldiers that came back were now able to get a mortgage. They were able to go to school. So things were really kind of booming in one area, but then in the other area, they were falling apart. The industry started to leave, or they sold out to multinational corporations, who then began to close and move their stuff south or to Asia. Living in the flats, it was kind of living in this kind of insular world. You went to school in the flats, you knew everybody there. We got plucked into the local Catholic school. We didn't speak English at all. We were the only Ecuadorians. There was no bilingual education. There was no other Spanish-speaking kids in the classroom. And I remember being in class and not understanding anything. But what happened at home is they would speak Spanish and we would speak English, the kids. We got to keep our language and they got to learn the new language. My father actually made friends with probably the only 2 or 3 Puerto Rican families that were living in the flats. My mother would always try to cook some of the meals and food that she cooked in Ecuador, and it was very hard to find the ingredients. At first, she couldn't find rice. Finally, she found some rice, but it was like the Uncle Ben's box, which she didn't know how to do that. In the 50s, in the western Mass and northern Connecticut, there was a lot of shade tobacco farms. And the companies with the United States Department of Labor connected with the Department of Labor in Puerto Rico and set up this agreement of sending people up here for the spring and summer to work on the tobacco farms. And when I was 14, the only job I could get was working on the tobacco fields. And that's where I met all these Puerto Ricans. So I got to understand what they were going through. The economy in Puerto Rico got really bad in the mid-60s. The more that happened in Puerto Rico, the more the Puerto Ricans stayed here instead of going back. So they began to settle in Springfield, in the North End. What happened was, in the early 60s, the government set up these programs for urban renewal, which some people say it was nothing more than to remove poor people out of neighborhoods, which I think it did a lot of that. Springfield had this big urban renewal program, and they targeted the North End. The people in the North End that were being moved out because the building was being condemned and torn down, they weren't going back to Puerto Rico because there was nothing there. The economy in Puerto Rico was bad. They were kind of stuck. And then people started moving into the flats in Holyoke. And before you knew it, there was this large Puerto Rican community in the flats. And the city of Holyoke didn't know what to do with it. To me, the Puerto Rican community really actually saved Holyoke. People's minds, it was like paradise until the Puerto Ricans came. But if you look at history, Holyoke has always had problems. The housing has always been poor. They were cited during the 1890s for bad sanitation. They had open sewers running downtown Holyoke. They had one of the highest infant mortality rates in the state. Cholera, all that stuff. And it was just like rampant because of the way the workers were housed. It was like this great collision of internal and external factors that brought the Puerto Ricans here, and they were blamed for everything that negatively that happened in Holyoke. And it wasn't their fault, it was just that they were here at the wrong time. After graduating from the Lawrence Junior High School, I went to Holyoke High. And this was like 66, 67, 68, 69, the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement, President Kennedy getting assassinated, and the whole country just traumatized. Martin Luther King and then Robert Kennedy. The environment was starting to become a big issue. Women's rights and women's liberation. It was just a time that nobody had the answers, but there was a lot of questions. Those were my formative years of the political kind of awareness of what was going on and stuff. I was living in South Holyoke, newly married, had a son, and I got a call from the legal service office, and this guy named Bill Fitzgerald. So he says, I know about you, and I'd like to offer you a job. And then like several years later, I became a fair share organizer for 3 years working in the Churchill neighborhood. And that's really where I learned the real nuts and bolts about organizing. One thing led to another. There was no clear, this is the path. It was made up as I went along. My political involvement has taken me from everything from organizing community meetings, getting people registered to vote, getting people to run for office, involvement in the schools, anything that smacked of advocacy and politics, I was involved with. I ran twice for a school committee in Ward 2, and I didn't get elected. And then in the mid-'80s, when I was involved with this parent group, a couple of us ran. I was living in Ward 7. I lost the primary because I think more people up in Ward 7 knew who I was and weren't really comfortable me representing them on the school committee. I don't have the ideas of the mainstream Holyoker. I've always said what I felt, and people didn't like that. I don't think I could get elected in the city of Holyoke as a dog catcher. Nueva Esperanza was an idea that was both new and old. For a long time prior to 1982, when Nueva Esperanza was established, several people would say, what we need is an agency that's going to really kind of focus on the development of South Holyoke. And it was seen as an agency that would be able to acquire property and money to fix up the properties, and then provide the kind of services that the residents of those buildings needed. That was the beginning of looking at funding and buildings and turning some of these buildings around in a major way. Over the next 30 years, we've been able to save 30 buildings and close to 400 units of housing. 1995, I was working late at Nueva, and the only thing I remember is getting up from my desk. And the next thing I remember was waking up in an ambulance going to the Springfield hospital. And I was told that I had a seizure at work, and they did a CAT scan and an MRI and found that I had a tumor. So I've been through 4 operations now. The last one was last September of 2009. After the second, I went through radiation, which the only thing it did is cause my hair to fall. The key person, all these health traumas, has been Elaine. She's very understanding about what's going on, very supportive, and very cautious. Her support has been crucial in my recovery and my health. Everybody should have an Elaine. My son Aaron, he was involved in this group called Crush. And they've been meeting and talking about government and the role of government. And he started talking about running for city council. I said, I don't know if being my son's going to hurt or help you. He said, what? Well, I said, a lot of people, know my name and have strong opinions about who I am and what I've done and everything else. So I'll help you as much as I can. But I think he and Deborah just focused. Just incredible how much Deborah really supported him running, really strongly urged him to run. It really was like their energy and their effort that really got him elected. But he's kind of following my footsteps, not exactly, but that whole idea of making some changes in the city. I could only say that I'm really proud of him and that it's going to be a different kind of fight for him. So I'm still not sure whether his last name helped or hurt him. It's been one of those trips that, you really can't plan out. And I've been fortunate enough to have people support me in this whole thing, this adventure. I think over the years, things have changed and have gotten better, but there's always some things that haven't gotten any better, that are still problematic. There's still challenges. When people look back in terms of what I did was history, I think that they'll find that my advocacy for the Puerto Rican community has been very consistent. That's probably what I would like to be remembered for.